Millionaire marries obese woman on a bet and is surprised when she reveals who she really is.
Before starting the video, tell me where you are watching this video and what time it is.
Julian Ashford was a man who carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Born into wealth and having multiplied his fortune with shrewd business ventures, Julian's life was a symphony of luxury and control. His penthouse apartment in Manhattan overlooked the glittering city, and his closet brimmed with bespoke suits. Known for his charisma and ruthless ambition, Julian thrived in boardrooms and exclusive social circles alike. Romantically, he had a type, slender, model-esque women who turned heads at every gala. He enjoyed being seen with them, basking in their beauty as a reflection of his success. But Julian wasn't interested in love. Relationships were a game, one where he always held the winning hand. His friends often teased him for his predictable tastes, yet Julian dismissed them with a smirk. "When you have it all, why settle for less?" he'd say. Life for Julian was a series of conquests, each feeding his insatiable appetite for power and validation. One evening, at a dazzling rooftop party thrown by his closest friend, Andrew Sinclair, Julian's arrogance would lead him into a challenge that would change his life forever. The rooftop party buzzed with energy, the city's skyline glowing against the velvet night. Julian swirled his glass of whiskey as Andrew approached with his signature, mischievous grin. "You know, Julian," Andrew began, leaning casually on the railing, "you're predictable." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Predictable? I'm a man of refined taste." Andrew chuckled. "Refined or shallow? You pick women like you pick wine, just for the label." Julian smirked. "And what's wrong with appreciating the finer things in life?" Andrew shook his head, amusement dancing in his eyes. "I've got a challenge for you, Mr. Ashford. Marry a woman who's nothing like your usual type. Someone unconventional. Let's say, someone most people would overlook." Julian scoffed. "And why would I do that?" Andrew grinned, pulling out his wallet. "Because I'll make it interesting. Marry her, stay married for 6 months, and I'll give you $1 million. Easy money for you, right?" Intrigued, Julian's competitive streak flared. "You're on," he said, shaking Andrew's hand firmly. The stakes didn't faze him. He relished a challenge. Little did he know, this seemingly frivolous bet would unravel his carefully curated world. Samantha Lawson didn't live in Julian Ashford's world. She was the woman who turned heads not for her appearance, but for her sheer presence. Standing confidently in her plus-size frame, Samantha radiated a charm that couldn't be measured by a tape or weighed on a scale. She had a contagious laugh, sharp wit, and a no-nonsense attitude that commanded respect. A small-town girl with big dreams, Samantha had built her life brick by brick. After her father's business collapsed, she worked tirelessly to support her family, eventually earning a degree in social work. Now, she ran a community center, dedicating herself to helping people reclaim their lives after hardship. Despite her challenging past, Samantha's warmth and strength had forged an unshakable resilience. She didn't seek validation from others, and she certainly wasn't interested in fitting into society's narrow mold of beauty. Her confidence was magnetic, and her independence unwavering. When Julian first set eyes on her at a charity event, she wasn't the least bit impressed by his tailored suit or million-dollar smile. Unbeknownst to her, she was about to be drawn into a game far removed from her reality, a game she had no intention of playing by his rules. Julian approached Samantha at the community center's charity gala, exuding his usual charm. "Samantha Lawson, right?" "Julian Ashford," he introduced himself, extending his hand. Samantha turned to him with a polite but measured smile. "Yes, I know who you are," she replied, shaking his hand briefly before returning her attention to a conversation with a colleague. And used to being dismissed, Julian wasn't deterred. "I've heard a lot about your work here." "Very admirable," he pressed, hoping to spark her interest. Samantha met his gaze, her eyes cool and direct. "Thank you. But if you're looking for a photo op or a donation that'll make headlines, we don't do that kind of publicity here." The jab stung, but Julian's smile didn't falter. "Actually, I was hoping we could get to know each other better."
Dinner, maybe?
Her lips curled into a wry smile. "Dinner, huh?" Let me guess, you're not used to hearing the word, no? Julian chuckled, intrigued by her candor. I take it as a challenge. Samantha's smile faded, and her voice turned serious. Let's be clear, Mr. Ashford. I don't play games, and I don't tolerate insincerity. So, unless you have something genuine to offer, don't waste my time. The wedding was a whirlwind, a spectacle Julian orchestrated with precision. Samantha, however, kept it simple. No lavish dress, no over-the-top vows. To her, the union was an agreement, not a fairy tale. Julian had courted her just enough to convince her to say yes, and now the bet was in motion. After the ceremony, Julian wasted no time introducing Samantha to his world of opulence. They dined in Michelin-starred restaurants, vacationed on private yachts, and attended high-society galas. Samantha remained unimpressed. She wore her thrift store finds to black tie events, making no effort to blend in. Julian found her defiance infuriating. Don't you think you should at least try to fit in? He asked one evening after an awkward gala where Samantha's blunt remarks had left a senator red-faced. Samantha shrugged. Why should I? I'm not here to play pretend. Julian realized Samantha wasn't going to be swayed by his wealth or influence. He began to escalate his gestures. Expensive gifts, grand gestures, even the offer of a penthouse makeover for her office. Samantha rejected them all. I don't need your money, Julian. If you think it'll buy my respect, you've already lost. For the first time, Julian felt the sting of losing control. Samantha refused to adapt to Julian's world. She kept her modest apartment, commuted to work daily, and spent her evenings volunteering at the community center. She didn't want luxury. She wanted purpose. Julian, frustrated by her resistance, began to manipulate situations to assert control. He tried to sway her through subtle domination, arranging for her landlord to offer her an irresistible buyout, leaving her no choice but to move into his penthouse. Samantha saw through the ruse and turned it down. Why are you so stubborn? Julian demanded one evening after yet another failed attempt to integrate her into his lifestyle. I'm trying to make things easier for you. Samantha met his gaze, unflinching. Easier for me, or easier for you to feel superior? Her words cut deep, forcing Julian to confront an uncomfortable truth. He wasn't just trying to impress her, he was trying to control her. Samantha's independence was an affront to everything he believed about relationships. Still, Samantha held her ground. She continued her work, immune to Julian's machinations. His world of power and control felt hollow to her. You can't break me, Julian, she told him one night, her voice steady. And if that's what you're trying to do, you'll only break yourself. The days turned into weeks, and the cracks in Julian's facade began to show. He wasn't accustomed to failure, yet Samantha seemed immune to his charm and wealth. Their interactions grew tense, filled with sharp exchanges that left Julian both frustrated and intrigued. One evening, after another silent dinner, Julian broke the ice. Do you even like me, Samantha? Or are you just here to prove a point? Samantha paused, looking at him with an unreadable expression. I don't dislike you, Julian. I just don't care about the things you think define you. Her words struck a nerve. Julian had always measured his worth by his achievements, his possessions, and the adoration of those around him. Samantha's indifference was a foreign and unsettling experience. Their arguments grew more frequent, but also more revealing. Julian began to notice things about Samantha he hadn't before: her deep empathy for others, her fierce dedication to her work, and the way her laugh could light up a room when she let her guard down. For the first time, Julian questioned what he truly valued. Samantha's strength and resilience were unlike anything he'd encountered, and though it frustrated him, it also fascinated him. Julian started to notice changes in himself. His usual distractions, business deals, luxury outings, and shallow flirtations, felt hollow. Samantha had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, forcing him to confront the emptiness of his lifestyle. He found himself seeking her out, not to win her over, but to understand her. He began joining her at the community center, initially out of curiosity. Watching her interact with people, he saw a side of life he'd never allowed himself to engage with, one where kindness and perseverance mattered more than wealth. One afternoon, after helping an elderly man carry groceries, Julian asked Samantha, "Why do you care so much about everyone else's problems?" Samantha turned to him, her expression softening. "Because I've been there, Julian. When no one else cared, someone helped me. It's not about saving the world. It's about doing what you can." Her answer lingered with Julian, sparking something unfamiliar. Samantha's integrity and selflessness were qualities he hadn't valued before, but now they felt like a lifeline. Though they continued to argue, their conversations grew deeper. Julian couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward her. For the first time, he began to wonder if this bet wasn't about winning, but about learning. One evening, after weeks of tension, Samantha finally let her guard down, but not out of affection. It was anger that forced her to confront Julian. They were arguing in the penthouse when Samantha's voice broke through, raw and trembling. "You want to know why I can't stand men like you, Julian? Fine. Let me tell you." Julian froze, taken aback by the fire in her eyes. "My father built his life on honesty and hard work," she began, her voice heavy with pain. "But he trusted the wrong people. People like you." Her gaze pierced him. "Your company acquired his small business years ago, an insignificant asset, you called it. It wasn't insignificant to us. It was everything." Julian's stomach tightened, his mind racing. He vaguely remembered the deal, but hadn't considered the fallout. After the acquisition, Samantha continued, tears brimming. "My father couldn't find work. The stress killed him. My mother was left to pick up the pieces, and I lost a pregnancy. Because of the stress it put on me." Julian staggered back, stunned. He had always seen himself as ruthless, but never cruel. Yet, in Samantha's story, he was the villain. "Now you know," she said coldly. "You didn't just ruin a business. You ruined lives." Julian sat in silence, the weight of Samantha's words suffocating him. For the first time, he couldn't justify his actions with the usual excuses, "It's just business," or "They should have been smarter." The consequences were too personal, too real. Samantha didn't wait for an apology. "You think you're untouchable, Julian, but people like me have paid the price for your empire. Do you even care? Or is this all just a game to you?" "I didn't know," Julian whispered, his voice cracking. Her laugh was bitter. "Of course you didn't. People like you never do." Julian wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth was undeniable. Samantha's pain was the result of his ambition, his blind pursuit of success at any cost. He had always seen himself as a winner, but now he realized how many people had lost because of him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. Samantha shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Sorry doesn't fix anything, Julian. It doesn't bring back my father, or my child, or the years we struggled just to survive." Her words cut deeper than any insult. For the first time, Julian felt true remorse, not for losing a bet, but for losing himself. The days following Samantha's revelation were a reckoning for Julian. He replayed her words in his mind, haunted by the destruction he had caused. For years, he had dismissed the human cost of his success, compartmentalizing his business decisions from their real-world consequences. Now, he couldn't escape them. Julian made a decision. He would change, not for Samantha, but for himself. He started by revisiting the acquisition that had destroyed her family's business, poring over records, and tracking the ripple effects of his actions. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered about the countless lives impacted by his choices. His first step was to set up a restitution fund, not just for Samantha's family, but for others affected by his business practices. He also reached out to local charities and began donating, not for tax breaks or PR, but to make a difference. "I want to make things right," he told Samantha one evening, his voice earnest. "I can't undo the past, but I can change what I do moving forward." Samantha regarded him skeptically.
"Words are easy, Julian."
"Prove it." Julian nodded. "I will. Even if you never forgive me, I'll keep trying." It wasn't a declaration of love, but of accountability, a step Julian had never taken before. Samantha watched Julian's efforts with cautious eyes. While she couldn't deny the sincerity in his actions, her heart remained guarded. Years of pain weren't erased by good intentions, and she wasn't ready to trust him. Not yet. Still, she began to notice changes in Julian. He was quieter, less arrogant, and more introspective. He started joining her at the community center, not to impress her but to genuinely help. He listened to people's stories, learning about struggles he had never faced. One evening, after an exhausting day, Samantha found Julian in the center's kitchen, cleaning up after an event. "You don't have to do that," she said, surprised. "I want to," he replied simply. "You do so much for others. It's time I did the same." Samantha couldn't help but feel a flicker of warmth. Julian's gestures were small but thoughtful. He didn't push her to forgive him or to feel something she wasn't ready for. Instead, he gave her space while showing his commitment through actions, not words. "I see you're trying," she admitted one night. "But trust isn't built overnight." Julian nodded. "I'll wait as long as it takes, Samantha. You're worth it." For the first time, Samantha felt a crack in her defenses. Julian threw himself into making amends. His first major initiative was a fund designed to support small businesses that had been harmed by corporate acquisitions, starting with Samantha's late father's company. He reached out to her family, offering financial support and a heartfelt apology. Samantha's mother, initially skeptical, eventually saw the sincerity in Julian's efforts. Beyond monetary gestures, Julian sought personal redemption. He began visiting families affected by his previous ventures, listening to their stories, and acknowledging his mistakes. These encounters humbled him, dismantling the arrogance that had once defined him. At the community center, Julian worked tirelessly alongside Samantha. He funded new programs, hired more staff, and helped expand the center's reach. But he never tried to take credit. Instead, he allowed Samantha to remain the face of their efforts, knowing it was her vision that drove the change. Though Julian was making progress, he knew his actions couldn't erase the pain he had caused. Redemption, he realized, wasn't about fixing the past but creating a better future. Each small step he took felt like a piece of his old self falling away, replaced by someone he hoped Samantha could one day trust. As Julian continued his journey of redemption, Samantha began to notice his quieter, more thoughtful side. He no longer flaunted his wealth or power. Instead, he showed care in the small, everyday moments. One evening, Samantha returned home to find her favorite meal waiting for her, prepared not by a chef, but by Julian himself. "It's not perfect," he said, sheepishly holding out a dish with slightly overcooked vegetables. "But I'm trying." Samantha chuckled, touched by his effort. "It's a start." Julian also paid closer attention to her preferences. He stopped insisting on grand gestures and instead focused on meaningful ones. When he overheard her mention needing a break, he arranged for her to have a quiet weekend away, complete with books and cozy blankets. No strings attached. Their interactions softened. Though Samantha maintained her independence, she found herself letting Julian into her life more willingly. They shared meals, late-night conversations, and even moments of laughter. For the first time, Samantha saw glimpses of a man who was learning to care not for appearances, but for the people around him. It wasn't love, yet, but it was trust, slowly and tentatively being rebuilt. The distance between Samantha and Julian began to shrink, replaced by a growing sense of understanding. Their relationship shifted from transactional to genuine as they started to find common ground. One quiet evening at the community center, after hours of organizing a food drive, Julian handed Samantha a cup of tea. They sat on the worn couches in the break room, surrounded by boxes of donated goods. For once, the silence between them was companionable. "Why do you keep coming back?" Samantha asked, her tone curious rather than accusatory. Julian hesitated before answering. "Because it feels real here. I've spent my life chasing things that don't matter. But this, what you do here, it matters." Samantha studied him, sensing the vulnerability in his words. "You're not the same man I met months ago," she said softly. "I hope not," Julian replied. "I want to be better.
For you.
For myself." Their moments together became more frequent and meaningful. Julian opened up about his childhood, his insecurities, and the pressures of living up to his family's expectations. Samantha, in turn, shared stories of her struggles and triumphs. Though neither said it aloud, they both felt it, the beginnings of something deeper, something worth holding on to. Samantha's guard didn't fall all at once, but piece by piece, she began to let Julian in. His consistent efforts to show her he had changed spoke louder than any words could. One day, Julian surprised her with a small but heartfelt gesture. At the community center, he unveiled a plaque dedicated to her father, honoring his legacy as a hardworking entrepreneur who had inspired others. Samantha's eyes glistened with tears as she read the inscription. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "I wanted to," Julian replied. "Your father deserves to be remembered, and so do the lessons his life taught you." Samantha felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She had spent so long protecting herself from pain, but Julian's steady transformation made it harder to hold onto her anger. That evening, as they walked to her car, Samantha turned to Julian. "I see you, Julian. I see what you're trying to do. And I want to believe in it." Julian's breath caught. "Does that mean?" "It means I'm willing to try," she said, a small but genuine smile breaking through. "But don't make me regret it." For the first time, their connection felt like more than hope. It felt like possibility. Months passed and Julian and Samantha's relationship deepened. Their bond grew not from grand romantic gestures, but from shared experiences, mutual respect, and a growing understanding of each other's worlds. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Julian invited Samantha to the rooftop garden he had secretly transformed. Strings of twinkling lights cast a warm glow over a simple but elegant dinner table. Samantha was skeptical as he led her up the stairs, but when she saw the setup, her breath hitched. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "It's not what you think," Julian assured her with a nervous laugh. "I wanted to talk to you. Really talk." As they ate, Julian opened his heart. "Samantha, I've spent my life chasing things that don't matter. But you've shown me what does. You've taught me what it means to care, to be honest, to live for something bigger than myself. And he hesitated, his voice trembling. "I love you." Samantha's eyes widened. She had expected many things from Julian, but not this. "Julian," she began, her voice soft. "You don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know." Samantha smiled, her hand reaching for his. "I love you, too." Julian's confession marked a turning point in their relationship. No longer bound by the constraints of the bet, they agreed to start anew, free of ulterior motives or expectations. Julian, humbled and deeply in love, wanted to make it official, not for a challenge or a prize, but because he couldn't imagine life without Samantha. A few weeks later, Julian surprised her again, this time in a setting far less extravagant than the rooftop garden. At the community center, surrounded by children she worked with and the staff who adored her, Julian knelt down with a simple yet elegant ring. "Samantha Lawson," he began, his voice steady and clear. "You've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. I don't want to live without you. Will you marry me this time for real?" Samantha's hands flew to her mouth as the room erupted in cheers. She looked at Julian, her eyes filled with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." This time, their engagement wasn't a transaction. It was a promise, a mutual commitment to a life built on love, trust, and partnership. As Julian slipped the ring onto her finger, Samantha realized she was finally ready to let go of the past and embrace a future with him. Samantha and Julian embraced their second chance with hope and determination. Their relationship, once built on a fragile foundation of pretense, now thrived on honesty and mutual respect. Together, they planned a future that honored their shared values, blending Samantha's grounded outlook with Julian's newfound humility. Their wedding was a modest affair, a stark contrast to the extravagance of their first ceremony. Held at the community center that had become a second home for them both, the celebration was intimate and filled with joy. Friends, family, and the people they had helped together surrounded them, creating an atmosphere of genuine warmth. Samantha wore a simple but elegant gown, her smile radiant as she walked down the aisle. Julian, standing at the altar, felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time in his life, he was certain about what truly mattered. During their vows, Julian spoke from the heart. "You've taught me that love isn't about perfection or appearances. It's about seeing each other's flaws and choosing to stay. I choose you, Samantha, every day, for the rest of my life." Tears filled Samantha's eyes as she replied, "I choose you too, Julian. Not because you're perfect, but because you've shown me you're willing to grow." The reception was filled with laughter, heartfelt speeches, and a sense of renewal. Samantha and Julian danced to a song chosen not for its glamour but for its meaning, a tune Samantha's father had loved. It was a tribute to the man who had shaped her resilience and strength. As the evening unfolded, a new revelation added to the celebration. During a quiet moment, Samantha pulled Julian aside. She held his hand tightly, her expression a mix of nerves and excitement. "Julian," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Julian was speechless. Then a wide grin spread across his face as he embraced her. "A baby?" he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Samantha, that's amazing." Tears streamed down Samantha's cheeks as she nodded. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of a future filled with love and possibility. Their wedding was more than a celebration of their love. It was a declaration of hope, redemption, and the life they would build together. As they looked around at the smiling faces of their guests, Julian and Samantha knew they had found something priceless, a second chance at happiness.